So as you probably know if you follow this channel, I've got a lot of outdoor aroids, or aroids that can cope in a UK climate now. And this one, the Amorphophallus Konjac, is probably one of my favourites. It's the hardiest one I've got. And I'm going to show you all of the aroids that I have outside all summer. And bear in mind that almost all of them go dormant over winter, so they don't have to cope with the minus temperatures. So let's have a look at the ones I've got and why I love Amorphophallus so much. So let's talk about the genus first of all. So these are plants that are in the Araceae family. So you have, the general name is aroids, and we're going to look at Amorphophallus. And there's probably somewhere in the region of about 170 species now, depending on where you get your information from. They're spread mainly across the Far East, so the tropics, from Western Africa all the way across past Australia and down to Polynesia. And a lot of them, and certainly a lot of the ones that I've got, are from Japan or Malaysia or Thailand and China. They are described as herbs, so they have an underground storage organ, or tuber as we call it, and there's usually just one tuber, and that does actually give offset. So generally they will propagate by throwing off new offsets during its life cycle. Generally speaking, there's just one petiole and generally just one large leaf, which is the big thing about these is that the one leaf is made up of lots of leaflets, and that's one of the distinctive characteristics of the Amorphophallus. So what you're seeing here is just one large leaf with one petiole, and that really distinguishes it from a lot of the other aroids that you may see. More often than not, that's divided at the top of the petiole into three. And that again is quite often, that can be 3 or 5 or more. But 3 is probably the most common. Now everyone knows of the giant Titan arum, the one that you see blooming every few years in the botanical gardens around the world. But these are all smaller cousins of that, and they do have an inflorescence in the same way that the Titan does. So it's one large central spadix, and that's the spadix is what holds the tiny flowers, and that is a distinctive look right across all of the different Amorphophallus. The spathe can be very variable, to, you know, from looking like a cup to it can end up looking more like an Aracema, which has like a hood, or it can be much more open like a Helicodycerus muscovarius from the Mediterranean, which is one of the other plants that I absolutely love that mimics an animal. The overall inflorescence acts really like one big flower, so you generally have the female parts at the base, usually hidden down inside the spathe, and the male parts usually a bit more on display. And then the top part, the appendix, is usually sticking out and is the smoother bit that you see. Because these are well known for being stinky plants, they generally are, the pollinators are generally beetles and flies, and they generally heat up, which is rare in the plant kingdom, and that attracts flies, as a lot of this type of aroid will do. So that includes things like the Dracunculus vulgaris and some of the Aracema, and certainly almost all of the Amorphophallus, with some exceptions that smell absolutely gorgeous. So the Amorphophallus albus is probably one of my 2 favourites, along with the Konjac. It's called the dwarf white voodoo lily in some places, and it's from pretty much temperate areas of the Far East, and it's predominantly tropical. It's a very, very simple plant to grow and to look after, and it doesn't get too large. It's not in any way like the Titan arums or anything like that. You know, you're looking at probably around 60 centimetres I've never had it above that really. It's got this gorgeous green stem, and that's what distinguishes it from a lot of aroids. So the petiole, should I say, is bright green on all of mine. And then it comes up to this large leaf with all these leaflets on it, which are you know, this is generally the number of leaflets that you'll get. So it's divided into 3 in most cases. It absolutely loves producing offsets, and it sends out a little stolon, and then that allows it to really clump up quite well, so you can get a nice little group of these. And for every season you grow one of these, you will get more. You'll definitely get more tubers when you dig it up at the end of the season. So as with all the Amorphophallus, this will grow through the summer and then come into the, once the temperature starts going down and the days start getting shorter, it will just wilt. And once it wilts, then you dig up the tubers and you just save them for your next cycle. So you just keep them fairly dry over winter in some kind of storage, and they're ready to start again as soon as the last frost is done. You need to make sure, as with all of these Amorphophallus, that it's in a free draining soil of some kind. So I generally do a mix of compost with perlite and sometimes bark, and sometimes gravel even sand. So the mixes I use do vary, but they're all free draining. If you pour water in, it pours out. So you keep them moist through the summer and completely dry through the winter. Now, my second favourite is the one that's probably the most common. I think everybody knows the Amorphophallus konjac. The tubers are an edible food source, and certain parts of the world it's processed and it's made into like a flour or a stiff jelly. And you'll find that in almost every health shop in the world. Konjac powder and konjac noodles and konjac rice is a very common food now. The Japanese make a flour, and that's then what is the basis of shirataki noodles. So as with all of the other Amorphophallus, it produces a single leaf from the tuber. Some people call these corms, but they're not corms. The correct term is, botanical term is a tuber. That is a stem, not a root. So it's an underground stem that's basically holding energy for the next cycle. Now these can get massive. People have got tubers that get into the kilos. So I've never had one much over a kilo myself. And it takes a good few years to keep getting them up. And the trick is to keep feeding these. Mainly, for me, it's mainly bone meal and things that have got a lot of phosphorus in it. I think in terms of NPK, so it's nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and it's the phosphorus that actually matters for the underground storage. The konjac's native to Asia, so including Vietnam, China, parts of Japan, Indonesia. It's well common in other parts of the world, but that's where it hails from. You'll find it almost all over the world, and it's readily available on eBay and from private sellers. It's not a plant that you can't get hold of easily. The great thing about a lot of these Amorphophallus is that you can basically pick a strain and then work with that strain until you've got a very specific looking variant, so a variety. So you can go for nightstick, for example, which has got a very dark petiole. That's a very popular one. There's one called Leosung that's got a much lighter petiole. It's lighter with a very few spots on it overall. And a bit more pinkish in look. And you can also cross them. So if you can cross, for example, an Albus, so Amorphophallus albus with an Amorphophallus konjac, and you can get the very well-known Mary Sizemore version. You can see this here. It's only a tiny one, and it's just coming up now, but you can see how light-coloured and much more like a Leosung that I just showed. But that's something that you can work with them and get some really strong looking varieties. So as with most of these Amorphophallus that I'm showing you now, I grow them all outside through most of the summer. Keep them out of strong sun, keep them out of ridiculous amounts of rain, which can be hard sometimes. But as long as they're not sopping wet in the roots, they do absolutely fine. And if there is ever a time when the temperature starts to drop, then just a case of dropping as many as I can back into the greenhouse. So one thing that can be a bit confusing with the konjac is the amount of names that there are out there. So I've actually got quite a few that are named. For example, Amorphophallus riviera. So there's some suppliers in the UK. That isn't one there, but I've got some suppliers in the UK that will just sell the normal konjac and actually call it riviera, because it is a synonym, and you'll see that online that some people call it that. But you'll also see ones called Amorphophallus stipitatis, and again that is basically just a konjac, but different suppliers and different collectors will name it that, and some of these names are, go back quite a way in time. Another common one is Amorphophallus bulbifer, one of the easiest ones to grow, if I'm honest with you. It's ideal for most parts of the UK and Europe outside, and it gives you an absolutely stunning inflorescence. It's got this really distinctive shape and look, and it looks almost fiery in some lights. So I only have a couple of these this year, and I have had some rot with them, so I've let them get too wet coming into the season. But these do very, very well. Wherever possible, try and put a bit more organic material, make sure there's lots, humus rich soil there for it to use, but again, don't let it get too wet, and by all means mix in a lot of grit and sand to help. A fairly new one to me, so this is Amorphophallus thaiensis, and as the name suggests, it's actually from Thailand, apparently from the highlands of Thailand, and because of that, I think people are saying that it's fairly hardy. Now, I'm not going to risk it because this is only my second year of having this, so I will, I'm not going to take any chances. And the first sign of any colder weather under sort of like 10 degrees, which, probably about September, I'll be bringing this one inside, as I don't want to risk it and I don't want to lose it. But there's a lot of people that do say it's fairly hardy. So it's only fairly small, so you'll get it less than 2 feet tall, so less than sort of like 50 centimeters at its tallest, and obviously, as you can see here now, this is about 20 at this stage, so not the oldest of plants here, and you can see that it's got very reddish petiole here, but they do go reddish and they can be speckled as well. So this is one that I'm hoping to get some offsets this year, and then hopefully maybe get a flower off this one next year. This one has a little green spathe, and I'm looking forward to seeing this one, as I say, it's a fairly new one to me. Another tiny one, really, or it's much smaller than some of these larger ones, is from Taiwan. It's called Amorphophallus henryi, and it's a hardy little plant. I've only got one, I think it's my second year of this one now, and it was tiny and kept it inside for the first year. This one grows well in the UK climate from all of my research, and it's doing well for me at the moment, although not growing particularly large straight away. And apparently it can take 2 or 3 years to get it to the tuber to a size where it'll give you a flower. So this is, take your time with this one and just make sure you're feeding it really feed it heavily to get it up to a size where it will give you that flower. Now the next couple, I do have quite a few others that I don't keep outside, so I'll just show you these just as a matter of interest. So one of the really gorgeous ones is Amorphophallus atroviridis. I've just done a video on this plant. It's got this cute pinkish petiole and these green velvet leaves, and the leaf margin has a pink line around the edges. Now this one, I do keep it out some of the time, but generally speaking, I just keep this inside a conservatory. I keep it very, very dry. It never gets damp. It's always, 2 inches down is always is dry. But obviously, I never let it dry out completely. And as you can see here, this one's got an offset and it's throwing up a baby. That's one of the plants that I don't do particularly well with historically. I've tried this a few times, but I seem to be doing okay at the moment with this one. So fingers crossed we'll see more of this one in my videos. And then a few that you just don't want to have outside. I just thought I'd throw these in at the end just to show you what these are looking like. So these are found in the forests of Vietnam and Laos, and some of these were only discovered in the last decade or so, really. So there's Amorphophallus claudelii. I've only got this tiny one. It was formally described in 2016, and it's just a tiny little dwarf species from Laos. And it reaches about 6 or 7 inches, or 15 or so centimeters. And like a lot of these little dwarf species, that it does give a ton of little offsets, but they are tiny. They're tiny little things, almost not much bigger than seeds sometimes. So you never throw the soil away from these, because it might have given you offsets that you might be able to raise later on. So my advice for any of these is always keep your soil. You'll need to go through at least 1 or 2 growing seasons to get these to flower. And probably of the smallest ones, my favourite is the Amorphophallus ongsakulii. This one is a really unique miniature species. Again, this was fairly recent, so only discovered in 2004 and described in 2006. again from Laos, and discovered by Alan Galloway, who's a very famous plant collector and an aroid guru, and another botanist and collector, Anup Ong-Sakul, who obviously the plant is named after. This tiny little plant, it only gives you 3 or 4 inches of petiole, and then you know, the single leaf with its leaflets, and this is like a tiny little tree. I absolutely adore this plant, and it, you know, I do struggle with it sometimes. I get it up quite regularly, and then the leaves crisp, so I've tried it in a large 4-foot terrarium. I've tried it in a 4-foot dry terrarium. I've tried it in a greenhouse. I've tried it at 30 degrees, and it's, you know, I'm just getting to the point now where I can get them to wake up and stay up. So they do take a bit more care, and you've got to understand you know, your temperatures and your humidity a lot better than a lot of the others. So these are the ones at the rarer end of the scale, and certainly for us in the UK, they're getting harder and harder for us to get. Certainly post Brexit, it's very difficult to get these kind of plants over here. So, you know, if what we need to do really is build up a UK community that shares what we've got in the country already, and I'd love to be part of that. So put it in the comments if you've got any of these smaller ones and you want to start sharing them around. And that's a good look at my current collection of Amorphophallus that can probably cope with, or certainly most of them can cope with, the UK climate through the summer and spring and autumn. I've got a lot of other aroids that I'm experimenting with now. Obviously, my goal with this channel was to move into outdoor aroids, so you're going to see a lot more of the Sauromatum, and I've got quite a few types of that now. So we've got the main Sauromatum venosum, Sauromatum horsfieldii that I've got growing outside now quite successfully. We've got a few of slightly rarer varieties. So we've got the Sauromatum venosum Lake Tanner from Jack over at Yorkgate Garden. That's got the more plain stem and the much brighter inflorescence, which I haven't yet seen, but I'm looking forward to that. And then my favourite, obviously, the Aracema, and I've got a garden full of Aracema now, so we'll cover that in other videos. But I think overall, my summary of this video is that Amorphophallus, if you can get to learn the basics of growing Amorphophallus and the life cycle with things like Konjac and Albus and Bulbifer, then you'll do well enough to then start moving into the rarer types and the ones that need a little bit more of care. And obviously, be careful of those stinky flowers, because, you know, a couple of days per flower per year, you're going to get a stinky, fly-ridden inflorescence that needs you know, some of them need to be smelled to be believed. So just be aware of that if you're going to tackle any of the Amorphophallus. I hope you're liking these videos, and if you are, please give us a thumbs up, because it does help us to get in front of other people that might like this kind of content. And if you like this video enough to give it a thumbs up, then why not subscribe to the channel?